The Verdict, Episode 5. The Atomic Bomb, the decision that ended World War II. On the 6th of August, 1945, a single bomb destroyed an entire city in seconds. Within 4 months, 140,000 people were dead in Hiroshima alone. 3 days later, it happened again, in Nagasaki. The men who ordered it said it saved millions of lives. But did it? And even if it did, was it justified? Today on The Verdict, we put the atomic bomb on trial. By the summer of 1945, World War II had been raging for nearly 6 years. Europe was finished. Nazi Germany had surrendered in May. But in the Pacific, Japan fought on with terrifying tenacity. American forces had been island hopping toward Japan for years, and every battle had been more brutal than the last. At Iwo Jima, over 26,000 Americans and Japanese died fighting over a volcanic island 8 miles long. At Okinawa, over 100,000 people were killed, including tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians. The planned invasion of the Japanese mainland, Operation Downfall, was estimated by American military planners to cost between 250,000 and 1 million American lives. Japanese casualties were projected to be even higher. Then came a choice that would change the world forever. President Harry Truman authorized the use of a new weapon, the atomic bomb, developed in secret under the Manhattan Project. And on August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. The world has been arguing about it ever since. The case against is, at its core, a moral one, and it is powerful. In Hiroshima, an estimated 80,000 people died instantly. The heat from the blast was so intense that some victims were vaporized, leaving only their shadows burned into the pavement. By the end of 1945, the death toll had risen to around 140,000 from burns, blast injuries, and radiation sickness. 3 days later, Nagasaki. Another 40,000 dead immediately, another 80,000 by year's end. The vast majority of these victims were civilians, not soldiers, not military commanders. Ordinary men, women, and children going about their mourning. Critics argue the bomb was never primarily a military decision. It was a political one. The Soviet Union had just declared war on Japan and was advancing rapidly. Some historians argue the real goal was to end the war before the Soviets could claim territory in Asia, and to send a clear message about American power in the post-war world. There's also evidence that Japan was already on the verge of surrender. The Japanese Navy was destroyed. The Air Force was crippled. American firebombing raids had already killed more people in Tokyo in a single night than the Hiroshima bomb. Some Japanese leaders were already seeking a negotiated peace through Soviet-backed channels. Was the bomb dropped to save lives or to win a geopolitical chess match? That question has never been fully answered, but the case against goes further than the immediate death toll. Consider the targeting decision itself. The United States specifically selected cities that had not been heavily firebombed. Hiroshima was chosen in part because it was relatively intact. A city that had not been destroyed could demonstrate the bomb's full destructive power. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, completed after the war, concluded that Japan would very likely have surrendered before November 1945, even without the bomb, even without a land invasion. If that assessment is accurate, then tens of thousands of civilians died not to end the war, but to test a weapon and project American power. That is a charge that demands serious consideration. Then there is the long shadow of radiation, the suffering that didn't end in August 1945. Survivors of the bombings, known in Japan as hibakusha, carried invisible wounds for the rest of their lives. Elevated cancer rates, leukemia, children born with birth defects. For decades, Hibakusha faced discrimination in Japanese society, difficulty finding work, stigma when seeking marriage partners, fears passed down to their children. The suffering of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not a single event. It was a wound that bled for generations. And finally, the prosecution must raise what may be the most consequential charge of all: the precedent. By using atomic weapons, the United States opened a door that has never been closed. The Soviet Union, spurred by the knowledge that such weapons were possible and effective, tested its own atomic bomb in 1949, years ahead of what American intelligence had projected. China followed, then Britain, France, India, Pakistan. The nuclear arms race that defined the Cold War, the era of mutually assured destruction, of fallout shelters and school drills, of the Cuban Missile Crisis that brought the world within hours of nuclear war, that world was born in the skies above Hiroshima. Truman ended one war. He may have started the conditions for a far worse one. We were fortunate that it never came. But fortune is not the same as wisdom. But the case for the decision is not as simple as its critics sometimes suggest. Japan in 1945 was not on the verge of a clean surrender. Yes, some leaders wanted peace, but the Japanese military dominated the government, and they were preparing for a suicidal last stand. The plan, called Ketsugo, involved arming the entire civilian population of Japan with bamboo spears, kamikaze boats, and suicide bombers to repel an American invasion. American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese communications showing preparations for exactly this. Military planners were not being paranoid. They were reading the enemy's own plans. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 killed an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 people in a single night, more than Hiroshima. Yet Japan did not surrender. The conventional bombing campaign was already causing civilian casualties on a massive scale with no end in sight. And the human cost of continued conventional war across Asia was staggering. Historians estimate that Japanese occupation policies were killing between 100,000 and 200,000 Asian civilians every month the war continued, through famine, forced labor, and massacre. Truman's defenders argue that however horrifying the bomb was, it shortened the war by months or years, potentially saving millions of lives across Asia and the Pacific on both sides. The bomb was not dropped on an innocent nation at peace. It was dropped on a nation that had launched a war of aggression across an entire continent, killing tens of millions. That context doesn't make the decision clean, but it makes it complicated. Let's look at what Operation Downfall would actually have meant in specific terms. The invasion was planned in two phases. Operation Olympic, the assault on the southern island of Kyushu, was scheduled for November 1945. American planners estimated between 130,000 and 400,000 American dead for that phase alone. Operation Coronet, the invasion of the main island of Honshu and the drive toward Tokyo, would follow in March 1946 and was projected to be even larger and bloodier. Japan had identified the likely landing beaches and pre-positioned over 600,000 troops to defend them. Japanese military planners expected to deploy more than 10,000 kamikaze aircraft against the invasion fleet on top of conventional defenses. The entire civilian population had been organized into militia units. Women, the elderly, and teenagers were being trained to fight with sharpened bamboo. The U.S. Army had ordered 500,000 Purple Heart medals in preparation for the invasion. So many were manufactured that the military is still issuing medals from that same stockpile today, more than 80 years later. These are not abstract projections. They are the concrete planning documents of the people who would have had to carry out the invasion. Their estimate of the cost was horrifying. But here is what the critics of the bomb rarely discuss. What actually happened inside Japan's government after the bombs fell, because it tells us something critical about whether surrender was truly close, even after Hiroshima, even after Nagasaki, even as the emperor himself was preparing to announce surrender. Japan's Supreme War Council was deadlocked. The army minister and both chiefs of staff voted against accepting the Allied terms. They preferred national annihilation to what they called dishonor. On the night of August 14th, the night before the emperor's surrender broadcast, a group of army officers staged a coup attempt inside the imperial palace. They tried to seize the recorded announcement and prevent it from being broadcast. They failed, but only just. This is how close Japan was, after 2 atomic bombs, to continuing the war. The idea that Japan was about to surrender peacefully without them is not supported by what was happening inside its own government. One more point the defense must make: a warning was given. On July 26, 1945, 10 days before Hiroshima, the United States, Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration. It called on Japan to surrender unconditionally. It warned explicitly of prompt and utter destruction if it did not. Japan's government publicly rejected it. Prime Minister Suzuki called it not worthy of consideration. The warning was not a secret. The offer was not hidden. The Japanese government's leadership chose to dismiss it. That choice had consequences, and those consequences were not solely Truman's responsibility to bear. So what's the verdict? This is the hardest verdict we've delivered so far because, unlike Genghis Khan or the Roman Empire, this decision was made within living memory. There are still people alive who survived it. Here is what we can say with confidence. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were among the most destructive acts ever carried out against civilian populations in the history of warfare. The suffering they caused was real, immense, and must never be minimized. The Hibakusha carried those wounds for the rest of their lives. Their children carried them too. The precedent set on those 2 August mornings in 1945 still haunts the world. Every nuclear weapon ever built, every arms race ever run, every near miss of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Able Archer exercise, the false alarms, traces back to the decision made in Washington that summer. And yet, the decision to use the bombs was made by human beings, fallible, pressured, and operating in a fog of war, not cartoon villains. Truman faced an impossible choice between certain horror and uncertain horror. He chose what he believed was the lesser evil. The evidence suggests that Japan's military leadership would not have surrendered quickly or cleanly without those bombs. That a land invasion would have cost millions of lives on all sides, and that every month of continued war meant hundreds of thousands more deaths across Asia. These are not comfortable arguments, but they are serious ones. Was he right? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. History cannot be run twice. We cannot know what the world without those bombs would have looked like, only what the world with them became. The verdict: the atomic bomb was a moral catastrophe that may have prevented an even greater one. The decision exists in a gray space that no amount of historical distance will ever fully resolve. What we owe, the very least we owe, is to keep asking the question, to resist the comfort of easy answers on both sides, to sit with the weight of what happened to the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and to never let the abstraction of strategy erase the reality of their suffering. The fact that we are still arguing about this 80 years later is not a sign of confusion. It is a sign that we are taking it seriously enough. That's the verdict. Was the atomic bomb justified? There may be no right answer, but I want to know yours. Drop your verdict in the comments below. If this episode made you think, please share it. These are the conversations history demands we keep having. Subscribe to The Verdict, because next time, another defining moment in human history goes on trial.